Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. I am so excited about today's video. In today's video, I am sharing your favorite independently published fantasy romance books. Alright guys, so just a heads up, this is going to be one of my longer rec videos. So typically twice a year I post a your favorite or subscriber's favorite fantasy romance video. Well, this year I decided to switch it up and I asked my subscribers on both Patreon and Instagram what is their favorite indie pub or independently published fantasy romance book. And oh my gosh, you guys delivered. I have never had so many responses on one video. I was completely shocked. So it took me a while to kind of map this video out. This video is filled with fantasy romance recommendations. A lot of these are actually new to me authors that I am so excited to check out. So for every book, I will give you a spoiler-free plot synopsis and then my overall thoughts if I've read it. And I cannot wait to talk about some of these independently published fantasy romance books. Now, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram, Goodreads, and Patreon, all linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about these indie pub fantasy romance books. All right, so starting off, we have Song of the Marked. This is an adult fantasy romance. I was positive I read this book. However, when I was looking up the plot synopsis, it does not sound familiar to me at all. So I'm thinking I probably started this and then ended up DNFing. Now it does have almost a 4 on Goodreads, so definitely worth checking out. Now, all I know about this story is we are following a girl named Kasha who is a mercenary. And she is a mercenary because she is trying to provide for her mentor who is very sick. And apparently the medicine is very expensive. So she works in order to take care of him. So she cannot pass up the opportunity when the king comes to her and says, hey, I will pay you a lot of money if you can go investigate a plague that has been apparently killing a lot of people in this kingdom. And she agrees and reluctantly has to agree to work with this very arrogant captain who I'm guessing she's later going to have a romance with. But while she's investigating this plague, monsters start popping up and apparently there are like meddling gods and it sounds awesome. So I am hoping to get to this soon. Let me know if you've read this. What were your thoughts? And next up, we have The Witch Collector by Carissa Weeks. This is another adult fantasy romance. So I read this last year. I believe I gave it 3 or 3.5 stars. Very solid start to a series. So in this, we are following Raina. And in Raina's world, every year, the Witch Collector comes and takes a person or a villager to serve the immortal Frost King, and that person is never seen or heard from again, which very much angers Raina because her sister was one of the ones chosen last year or a few years previously. So Raina has decided she's gonna kill the Witch Collector and the King, and I was all for it. However, when the Witch Collector comes to collect Raina, a bigger threat ends up emerging as they are traveling to the king, and they have to work together to survive. I did really enjoy this. I never continued with this series. I think I just read this at the wrong time, but definitely worth checking out. So according to Goodreads, this next book is perfect for fans of both Fourth Wing and Mariana Zapata. Those are 2 wildly different types of romance. I love both Fourth Wing and Mariana Zapata, but I am definitely intrigued. Now, it is called Between Flames and Deceit, and it is the first book in a adult fantasy romance trilogy, and the plot sounds awesome. Also, a few of you actually recommended this book, and I had never heard of it. Most of the titles I've at least heard of, but I definitely want to get to this one if there is audio available. So in this, we are following this princess who is forced into an arranged marriage in order to save her people, and I believe she possesses dragons, given the plot synopsis. Then we have the king, who has done everything in his power in order to secure this marriage to the princess and his son in order to obtain her dragons and also help his people. However, when the princess gets there, the king and the princess have this instant chemistry. So now they have to decide What is more important, their love or the realm? I don't know if this is going to have an age gap, but it kind of sounds like it, and I am all about age gap romance and forbidden romance. So honestly, everything about this book sounds awesome, and I cannot wait to get to it. And next up is House of Lies and Shadow. Now, I believe this is a young adult fantasy romance series. However, Goodreads sometimes lies to me, but we are following a 17-year-old character. So in this, we are following 17-year-old Fallon, who is suffering from a deadly curse. Actually, she's been living with this curse her entire life. So anytime someone touches her, she experiences immense pain. So she's had to live a very isolated life with absolutely no love, no touch, until she is forced to go to the Gilded City in the hopes of finding a fae healer that will be able to heal her dying father. Well, while searching for said healer, she ends up being touched by another boy in this city, and somehow she feels no pain. But a bunch of fae ended up seeing this kind of interaction, so they decide they want to use Fallon's gifts for their own means, probably for very bad reasons. So she has to try to escape their clutches, and I think she ends up in some sort of academy where she is going to learn how to use her powers, and I believe there will be a bit of a romance with that boy that kind of touched her in the very beginning. So it sounds very cute. I've read other books by this author, and I'm pretty sure both of them were also young adult, so this probably is young adult. But let me know if you've read this, what did you think? And I was so excited when I saw one of you recommended The Lies of Lena. Now, I am desperate to read this book. Unfortunately, the audiobook does not drop until January, I believe, but I actually picked up a physical copy just because I am so excited. Now, this is a dark romantasy, and one thing I have heard is that as you progress through the series, it just keeps getting darker. Now, when I was on Goodreads looking up the plot synopsis, I noticed that this is one of those books you are probably going to either love or hate. There were a ton of 1 stars, but also a ton of 5 stars. So I'm very curious where I'm gonna land. I know one of my friends was actually reading this a few months ago, which is why I purchased a physical copy, because she was loving book 1, but then I think she wasn't quite a fan of book 2. So very, very curious. But anyway, like I said, dark romantasy, we are following Lena. And Lena is a mage living in a world where mage are hunted and killed. So her mother and herself end up moving to another territory and are just trying to hide the fact that Lena has magical abilities. So she ends up meeting this guy named Quill, and Quill teaches her how to fight, but the entire time that they're building this connection, Lena is keeping the fact that she is a mage a secret, and it's really eating at her. And then something happens that they end up splitting up, and they aren't able to see each other for 5 years. So that's all I know about kind of their story. Then we're following another character named Silas, who is the prince of this kingdom, who after his sister was captured, he has been sequestered to his castle and not allowed to leave. And I believe he ends up leaving at the very start of this book, and we're also following him. I'm assuming, given the cover, this might be either Why Choose or Love Triangle. I've honestly been loving love triangles recently, so I'm really hoping it's Love Triangle. But either way, as soon as January comes, I will be listening to this book. And next up, a few of you said, A Tongue So Sweet and Deadly. Now, I'm pretty sure this is getting picked up by a traditionally published publisher. However, when I looked online, it still says Indie Pub. And 2 of you really love this series. I've only read this first book, however, I did very much enjoy it. So this is the start of a adult fantasy fae romance, and in this we are following Alessia. Now Alessia is a half fae, and she has the very dangerous ability to bend someone's will with a single glance. Now, once again, very dangerous, and after a tragic accident lands Alessia in the dungeons, she ends up making a blood oath with the Fae King. So 5 years later, the Fae King ends up calling in this blood oath. Obviously, Alessia has no choice. And he tells her that she needs to infiltrate these human elections to try to discover if the human regent is somehow conspiring against the Fae. So Alessia is going to be accompanied by one of the Fae King's kind of soldiers, and together they are going to have to be part of this election without drawing any suspicion from the other participants, including that human regent I mentioned earlier. I do believe this is kind of setting up a love triangle. However, in this first book, it is just like straight up fantasy romance. I think it's going to happen like in the second or the third. But either way, I did enjoy this. I am now realizing though, I keep kind of mixing up Empire of Flame and Thorns and this book because the FMCs both have a very similar magic. I actually preferred Empire of Flame and Thorns a little bit more to this book, but both are amazing reads. All right, so this next book I have had on so many recent TBRs. However, I still have not gotten to it. My work picked up again, so I am once again very, very behind on my TBR. But we have Smoke and Scar, which is an adult fae fantasy romance. I've had a lot of friends read this, and they really enjoyed it, and at least 4 of you guys recommended this book. So in this world, the humans and the fae hate each other, so they hold a crucible, which is essentially a bunch of trials, every 25 years. So one of our main characters is Illyria, and she is a fae warrior who is very upset because her greatest love died in the last crucible 25 years ago, and now his sister is planning on competing in the current ones. So she decides she's going to compete in order to save his sister. Now we are also following a warrior from the human side who ends up joining the crucible in order to try to kind of gain glory for the humans. However, he ends up being partnered with Illyria, and he believes she is the one responsible for killing his family, so they do not get along. However, as they are having to work together, I guess a bond starts to grow between them, and they have to decide if their love is greater than their 2 respective peoples. And I need to read this. I'm really hoping to get to this in November. We will see. Another book, if you've read this, let me know, what did you think? All right, so next up is Kissed by the Gods. This is an adult fantasy romance that has 4.5 on Goodreads. I added this to my TBR immediately. I have never heard of this book, but the plot sounds fantastic. So thank you so much whoever recommended this. Now, in the story, we are following Lena, and Lena has spent her life in servitude. She has really lived a very humble and kind of sad existence, but everything changes when warriors show up to arrest her brother. Now, somehow, Lena accidentally kills all of them. It's not exactly clear how she does this in the synopsis, but somehow all of these soldiers end up dead. So Lena assumes she is going to be executed kind of alongside them, but a God-sworn warrior, and a very privileged one at that, ends up sparing Lena and takes her into this world that she was never meant to be a part of, that is filled with gods and winged horses and magic, and she ends up being kissed by a goddess. Well, because of this, she becomes very wanted by some powerful people, and she is going to have to learn how to use her magic and try to stay away from all of the people that are trying to use her. Once again, I added this to my TBR immediately. I don't know if there's an audiobook, but if there is, this is definitely being read in November. And next up, we have The Child of Shivay. Now, I have to say, this cover is stunning. I absolutely love this art style, and I've had a few friends pick this up recently, as well as 2 of you actually recommended this. So I'm hoping to get to this soon. So what I gathered from the plot synopsis, which is a little bit confusing in the beginning, 200 years ago, humans almost wiped out all of the Fae, so the ancients ended up kind of splitting this realm into a bunch of different segments. And one of the people living on one of these segments is our main character, Shivay, and she is an elite assassin, and she has been training her entire life to kill one of the kings of these different territories. However, when she gets there, things kind of go awry, and she ends up somehow bound to the king's general. And that is all I really know, but apparently this is forced proximity, enemies to lovers, fae fantasy romance, all the things that I love. So I am really hoping to get to this soon. And this next book is a forced marriage vampire romantasy. I love all of those things. I am so excited about this book. So it is The Lesser Gods, and in this we are following Emmeline. So Emmeline lives in a world where humans and vampires have been fighting for 200 years. That seems to be the common time frame for all of these books. Anyway, Emmeline is a scholar, and she is desperate for peace between the vampires and the humans. Well, somehow she becomes kind of an unwilling sacrifice to the vampires, and the vampires decide they are going to wed her to their prince in the hopes of kind of creating some sort of peace between the humans and the vampires. So really, the fate of humanity rests on this marriage working out, and it sounds so good. I love forced proximity. I also love vampire romances. I kind of wish I knew about this like right when spooky season started, because I don't know if I'm gonna have time to read it in October, but maybe I can like squeeze it in the last few weeks. And next up, a few of my patrons actually recommended The Crown of Oaths and Curses by Bree, which we actually read as a Patreon read-along at the beginning of this year, and I'm pretty sure almost all of us ended up giving this pretty high ratings. This is very much a true enemies to lovers witch/fae romance. There is very little romance happening in this book. Our two main characters loathe each other, like would full on kill each other. This is like the greatest example of enemies to lovers. But a very kind of like broad idea of the plot is we're following this witch who is forced out of her home because the fae have taken over and are killing the witches. And she has to return to her homeland because there has been a prophecy that she has to marry her greatest enemy, which happens to be the Fae Prince. So she is going to do this in order to save the realm. And once again, these two people, they hate each other. So he locks her in a dungeon like right off the bat, and it's their romance, or at least I hope it will be their romance in the second book. I still have not picked up the second book. I do not believe there is an audiobook available yet. However, I'm hoping one releases soon, because once again, I absolutely love this. And next up is A Kingdom of Shadow and Ash. I talked about this book recently in my Kindle Unlimited fantasy romance rec video that I'll leave in the cards and the description. But this is a new adult romantasy that I know my friend April from Happily Ever April really enjoyed. So this is set in a world where 100 years ago, these 8 different kingdoms ended up destroying a witch kingdom and left it a barren wasteland and have never spoken since. Well, Mal, our main character, is ready to kind of bridge the gap between these kingdoms by marrying the Fire Prince, who is apparently supposed to be very cruel and kind of evil. However, she does not want to win the Fire Prince's heart. She wants to stab him. So it's going to be their romance. I'm guessing this also kind of features forced proximity and enemies to lovers. And the art style on this cover, I think, is so pretty. So another book I'm hoping releases soon via audio. And a few of you said The Forgotten Dawn, which is one of my top fantasy romance reads of the year. So I am so happy you guys are loving it. It has essentially every fantasy romance trope that I am obsessed with, including a shadow daddy, which like perfection. So in this, we are following Brea, and Brea has no business being among the Fae courts. However, in order to save her dying father, she forges an invitation to the Fae trials. So she is going to compete in the Fae trials, despite having no sort of magic like everyone else competing, and she is going to try to survive and win. While all of this is happening, though, she catches the eye of a certain shadow prince, and it really goes from there. I absolutely loved this book, and the second book, I believe, is releasing soon, so definitely keep that on your radar. Alright, so for complete transparency, I just spent a good 10 minutes trying to figure out what the plot of this next book is about, and I really got nothing. So we have Of Nightmare and Fire. This is set in a world that seems to be like ruled by nightmares, and our main character has accepted this life of just sleeping and dealing with nightmares and waking and also dealing with them until she ends up running into someone that somehow sparks hope in her, and it's their romance. Now, I wasn't even going to mention this book, however, it has amazing reviews on Goodreads, so I'm hoping it's one of those books where it's better really not knowing very much going in. I will say I was looking up some of the reviews just to get an idea to give you a better plot synopsis, and someone said it had Freddy Krueger-inspired dark magic. I'm intrigued. That sounds awesome. So if you were the person that recommended it, if you want to give me a little bit more about what the book is about, please feel free to do so in the comments. But either way, I love dark romantasy, and this seems pretty unhinged given a lot of the reviews I looked at. So very excited to check this one out. And next up, we have The Secrets of Jane Forgotten. I didn't even realize this was Indie Pub until I saw a few of you recommending it. this was one of my top reads of the summer. It is a pirate fantasy romance, dark pirate fantasy romance, but I feel like it's actually more romantasy than pirate. It definitely has that pirate feel, but the romance and the actual like fantasy in this was so good. And the main character is unhinged in the best possible way. I absolutely loved her. So in this, I'll give you a very brief plot synopsis because this is another one I feel like it's kind of better to go into somewhat blind. We're following this kind of bounty hunter who works for a group of pirate mercenaries, and he has a very special magical ability that is very helpful in the bedroom. And he has been sent to capture a girl that he knows nothing about, just that these pirates want her brought back. Then we're also following the girl whose entire village is now ablaze. She is running for her life and she is desperate to not be captured by this hunter who ends up capturing her in chapter 1. And it's them traveling to these like top pirates and her trying to escape him, but also a bit of a romance. And I love this. I still haven't read the second book. I don't know if there's audio. I do know it released. And I actually met the author at Books, Gowns, and Crowns. I had no idea she was going to be there, and I fangirled so hard. Like, I booked it to her table. So she was an absolute sweetheart, and definitely recommend giving this book a try. And next up, we have Riftborne. Now, this is either a new adult or adult fantasy romance. I read this book right when it released, and I have very mixed feelings. But in the story, we are following Fia Riftborne, and she has lived as an outcast ever since there was a rebellion and her side kind of failed. So she has been trying to keep her head down in this city, and she's also harboring this power that she is unable to control. And this becomes a very big problem when she accidentally lashes out at these two noble girls and kills them. So the head of this like elite training regimen says, hey, either we're going to execute you or you can come train in this program and help defend our city against these wraiths. Obviously, our main character, Fia, is like, I don't want to die. So she agrees, and it's her story. Now, why I'm slightly conflicted over this book, which I will say, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, no one actually did say Riftborne. They all said the sequel book, which is why I have some mixed feelings. I wasn't a huge fan of this first book. I thought that it had a lot of tropes that I've seen before, and it felt very similar to another book I was reading at the time. However, a lot of people are saying the second book is phenomenal and so good. So I am very curious, if you have read the sequel to this and you weren't a fan of this book, did you love it? Like, what were your thoughts? Because so many of my friends I know weren't really crazy about the first book, but they are loving the series, like, overall. So I might end up checking this out in the future. And next up, we have Fortune Favors the Cruel. Now, I 100% thought this was a young adult fantasy romance given the cover, but apparently it is a dark romantasy. So in this, we are following Mel, and Mel has been recently freed from chains. Somehow she was enslaved, and now she is determined to get vengeance on the people that enslaved her. But her vengeance is gonna have to wait because her blood magic is starting to emerge and her ascension is looming on the horizon. Then we're following another character who is a nobleman who's apparently very arrogant, and he's been waiting for a mage of great power to emerge. I'm assuming that mage is Mel. I have no idea what happens after that. That is all Goodreads wanted to tell me, but this also has pretty good reviews. I think it had like 3.8, 3.9. So another book definitely worth checking out. Okay, so one of you recommended Trick, and I have so many questions. I am so intrigued. So apparently in Trick, we are following a court jester, and the tagline is, stay away from the court jester, especially if you're a good little princess. And this is a spicy enemies to lovers fantasy romance. Now, the plot doesn't really give me like a good idea of what's going to happen. All it really explains is that the court jester is known in this kingdom, and I guess people really like love his touch, and the way he selects a new target is by leaving a ribbon on your pillow, and then you know like you're next. But I definitely need to read this book. So if you've read this, can you let me know a little bit more about it? And also, I'm really hoping there's an audiobook available. And I also really want to point out that this is a book that Goodreads is trying to tell me is young adult, despite the fact I think this author put like 11 different content warnings saying that this was spicy. So like I said, sometimes Goodreads, not the most trusted source. But anyway, I cannot wait to check this book out. Alright, so by the time I'm finished this video, my TBR is going to be out of control. So next up we have Of Night and Blood, which also features an absolutely stunning cover. So this is a dark enemies to lovers fae fantasy romance. And in this, we are following Asher. Now, Asher is the princess of the Fae realm, and she harbors a power that has never been seen before. Now, there's a lot of animosity kind of brewing between the humans or mortals and the Fae, so Asher ends up agreeing to marry the mortal prince. But as her wedding day starts to approach, and after some encouragement from a random stranger, she begins to dream of a life where she is able to rule and live her life for herself and by herself. So she decides that she is going to try to make that happen, and I'm guessing the story kind of progresses from there. But another book that I had never heard of, and two of you recommended it, so thank you guys so much. Another book I cannot wait to get to. Alright, so this next book is technically dystopian romance, although Goodreads does say romantasy and dystopian, so there might be some magic thrown in there, although I didn't really notice any when I was reading the plot synopsis. But we have Us Dark Few. I have been loving dystopian romance lately. I actually just filmed a dystopian / post-apocalyptic rec video right before filming this video, so that should be out pretty soon. Now, apparently in this, we are following a girl that has lived in an underground city of Apollo her entire life, and she ends up being wrongfully accused of a crime and sent to a prison where every day is a fight for survival, and it becomes even more dangerous when a evil kind of guard is assigned to her. Now, I'm going to take a wild guess and say she ends up in a relationship with said guard, but I love a kind of like forced proximity, enemies to lover, dystopian romance. I just read To Cage a Wild Bird, which has a very similar plot. So I'm hoping to love this book just as much. Alright, so I am moving Ruined Wings higher up on my priority list for my TBR. 5 of you guys mentioned Ruined Wings, which I know doesn't seem like a lot, but I think it might have been one of my most recommended. This is a Why Choose Dragon romance, and I honestly haven't seen very many people talking about it, but apparently it's very good. So in this, we are following this girl, I believe her name is Tem, and she is living in a community of hunters. Now, she has some sort of magical ability that if these hunters found out about it, they would kill her. Well, that's exactly what ends up happening. She, in order to save, I believe, her sister, ends up revealing that she does have these magical abilities. And before she can be killed by the hunters, these 2 dragon shifters show up and tell her that she is actually gonna have to marry someone named the Beast, who I believe is like the highest up dragon in this order, and learn how to use her magic successfully. So I believe this is her having a romance with all of these different dragon shifters and also kind of learning about her magic. But I am so excited to pick this up now. Alright guys, that is it for your favorite indie fantasy romance books. Now, like I said in the intro, I received quite a lot of recommendations, so this was not all of them. I tried to narrow it down to titles that I received multiple recommendations for. But I will leave all of the other books down in a pinned comment in the description, and honestly, I might end up doing a part 2 to this and just posting the question again on my socials. So if you are not following me there, go check that out. That is where I post like all of my polls. But I want to say a very special thank you to my Paladin protectors, and hopefully my computer did not die. It did not. Okay. Amanda, Leslie, Christy, Kat, Lada, and Jess, thank you guys for supporting my channel. And I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week.